The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt of River Road, a quiet street in the prestigious neighborhood of Sand Springs, where nothing more interesting than the local gardening club meetings usually took place. But today was different. The white two-story house with columns at number 23 was surrounded by police cars, their flashing lights painting the facade in ominous red and blue. Neighbors gathered at a safe distance, whispering and speculating. 3 patrol officers were pulling up yellow tape to cordon off the area around the house from prying eyes. A chalk path led from the gate to the front door, where a few minutes earlier, 2 officers had carried out a woman in a blood-stained silk blouse. The Sand Springs police dispatcher received the call at 4:35 p.m. A woman's voice, surprisingly calm, reported a murder. "I shot my husband. The house is at 23 River Road." The caller said nothing else and hung up. When the first patrol car arrived at the scene, the door was opened by Hilda Carter, a 35-year-old woman who had returned from her honeymoon just 2 weeks earlier. She silently handed the officers a Smith & Wesson pistol wrapped in a kitchen towel and pointed to the bedroom door on the second floor. Melvin Carter's body was found on a wide bed with a burgundy bedspread soaked in blood. The 40-year-old man was lying on his back with his arms outstretched and his eyes glazed over. 3 bullet holes in his chest left no doubt as to the cause of death. An open leather diary lay on the bedside table, and scattered photographs lay nearby. Detective Sandra Johnson arrived at the scene 20 minutes after the call. As she pulled up to the house, she froze for a moment, looking at the luxurious mansion that had been the talk of the town for the past few months. Melvin Carter, owner of the largest construction company in the county, had spared no expense on his new family home. "Another day in paradise," Sandra muttered, as she got out of the car and put on her latex gloves. The 42-year-old woman with short, curly hair and piercing brown eyes was the only female detective at the Sand Springs Police Department and had a reputation as a bulldog who never let go of her bone. She was met at the entrance by Deputy Sheriff Jim Harris, a graying man with a tired face and a wary expression. They had worked together for 5 years but had never become close colleagues. Jim was conservative and had difficulty accepting a woman as a detective, although he never said so directly. "The situation is crystal clear," Jim began, leading Sandra into the house. "The wife shot her husband. She didn't even try to hide or come up with an alibi. She called the police herself, opened the door herself, and handed over the gun." Sandra nodded but said nothing. She never jumped to conclusions before thoroughly examining the crime scene. Too often, something more complicated was hidden behind the obvious. Inside, the house was lavishly decorated with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and expensive furniture. Fresh wedding photos in silver frames hung on the walls. The happy faces of Melvin and Hilda looked down from every side, creating a stark contrast to the reality of that day. "Where's the suspect?" Sandra asked, looking around the living room. "In the kitchen with Officer Parker. She's in shock, but she can talk. The doctor has already examined her." Sandra nodded. The crime scene first. They went up to the second floor. The bedroom was spacious, with large windows overlooking a well-kept garden. The medical examiner was already working on the body, and a technician was photographing every corner of the room. "Time of death is approximately between 2 and 3 p.m., the medical examiner reported without looking up from his work. 3 gunshot wounds to the chest at close range. Death was almost instantaneous. Sandra carefully examined the room. Shards of a broken glass lay on the floor, and the bedside lamp had been knocked over. In the corner stood an open suitcase with men's clothes. It looked like the couple had recently returned from a trip and hadn't had time to unpack. "What's this?" Sandra pointed to the photographs scattered on the bed and floor. One of the technicians picked up several photos and handed them to her. The photos showed a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Melvin Carter. Other photos showed the same woman at different stages of her life, as a teenager, then as a college student. "Interesting," Sandra muttered, carefully placing the photos in an evidence bag. She walked over to the bedside table and picked up an open diary. The page was filled with neat handwriting. "Tell H the truth. She deserves to know. After the honeymoon. Jim, run a background check on Melvin Carter. Everything you can find about his past," Sandra said, handing the diary to the technician. "You think there's more to this than meets the eye?" Jim asked with a hint of irritation. I'm just doing my job. Check the rest of the rooms. I'll talk to Mrs. Carter. Sandra went downstairs and headed for the kitchen, where Officer Parker, a young black woman, was sitting next to Hilda Carter. The suspect had already changed into clean clothes. Her hands were washed, but traces of blood were still visible under her fingernails. Hilda's face was motionless like a mask, her eyes staring at a single point. Mrs. Carter, I'm Detective Sandra Johnson, Sandra said, sitting down across from her. Do you understand what happened? Hilda slowly raised her gaze. Her eyes were dry but red as if she had been crying for hours. I killed my husband, she said in an even voice. Why did you do it? Hilda pressed her lips together and remained silent for a few seconds. He cheated on me. He betrayed me. He built our whole life on a lie. Can you explain in more detail? He's not who he said he was. He never was. Sandra paused, looking at the wedding photo on the refrigerator. You got back from your honeymoon 2 weeks ago, right? What happened today? I was sorting through our things and found his old box. There were documents in it, photographs. The whole truth, Hilda said slowly, as if each word caused her physical pain. Melvin used to be a woman. Do you understand? A woman? Melanie. He changed his body, his documents, his whole life. And he never said a word to me. Sandra tried to keep a neutral expression on her face, although the news took her by surprise. Now the photos and the diary entry made sense. What happened after you found those documents? I waited for him to come home from work. I asked him directly. He didn't deny it. He said he was going to tell me after our honeymoon, that he should have done it sooner, that he loved me. Hilda spat out the last words with contempt. Loved me? And he lied to me for years. I'm a religious woman, detective. I would never have married someone like that. And you shot him? He went upstairs, started taking out these photos, talking about his past, about how he was unhappy until he became himself. Himself. Hilda's voice trembled. And then he said that I had to accept it if I really loved him, that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. My whole life collapsed in an instant. Sandra nodded, taking notes. Where did you get the gun? It was always in the house. Melvin bought it for protection. He kept it in the top drawer of the dresser. And you went after it on purpose? Hilda shook her head as if coming out of a trance. I don't know. I was in a fog. I remember yelling at him trying to calm me down. I remember getting the gun. And then he was lying on the bed, and I was standing there with the gun in my hands. Sandra watched the woman closely. Shock, denial, anger, the classic stages of reaction to a traumatic event. But something in Hilda's story seemed incomplete. Mrs. Carter, did you know Melvin before you got married? 2 years. We met at church. He was donating money for a new roof. We started dating, and he treated me like a gentleman. He proposed 6 months ago. Everything was perfect. Hilda paused for a moment. We even talked about children. Children. And he knew all along that it was impossible, and he never said a word. Jim entered the kitchen, holding a plastic bag with evidence. I found something else. In the office, in the safe. Medical documents about a sex change, dated 15 years ago. Sandra nodded and turned back to Hilda. Mrs. Carter, you said you found the documents in a box. Where exactly did you find it? In the garage, among the boxes we hadn't unpacked after the move. I was looking for my winter clothes. And you'd never seen this box before? No. Melvin was always very organized. He had his own places to keep things. I respected his space. Sandra stood up. Mrs. Carter, you are under arrest for the murder of Melvin Carter. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney. Hilda listened to the rights being read with the same detached expression on her face. When Officer Parker helped her to her feet, she suddenly froze. Detective, do you believe in God? She asked unexpectedly. Sandra hesitated before answering. Is that relevant to the case? I've followed the rules my whole life. I believed I was living right, and now I'm a murderer. Hilda shook her head. You know what's the worst part? Part of me still loves him, even now. When the officer led Hilda away, Sandra remained standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the wedding photo of the happy couple. Jim came over and stood beside her. It's clear, right? The woman found out her husband used to be a woman, lost it and killed him. Let's write up the report and send it to the prosecutor. Sandra shook her head. Too many questions, Jim. Why did Melvin keep those photos if he was so careful about hiding his past? Why did he decide to tell the truth now? And most importantly, why would a successful businessman who had been living a new life for 15 years marry a woman with such conservative views, knowing that the truth could come out? Maybe he thought love would conquer all, Jim grunted with undisguised skepticism. We need more information. I want to talk to people who knew him, friends, colleagues. Someone must have known the truth. Don't you think you're overcomplicating things? The woman confessed. The weapon was found. The motive is obvious. Sandra looked at her partner. Nothing is ever as simple as it seems, Jim, especially when it comes to marriage and secrets. They left the house, where the crime scene team continued to gather evidence. More neighbors had gathered, the news of the murder spreading through the town like wildfire. Sandra knew that by morning the whole story would be on the front pages of the local newspapers, embellished with speculation and rumors. As she got into the car, she took one last look at the house that was supposed to be the start of a new life for Melvin and Hilda, but instead had become the scene of a tragedy. Why did a successful couple, just back from their honeymoon, end their relationship this way? What exactly happened in those fateful minutes between the revelation and the shots? And was Hilda the only one who didn't know the truth about her husband's past? The morning at the Sand Springs police station began for Sandra Johnson with a cup of strong coffee and a stack of documents she had requested the day before. Police records, medical records, bank statements, anything that could shed light on Melvin Carter's past. Have you been here all night? Jim Harris stopped at her desk, holding his usual thermos of tea. Sandra rubbed her tired eyes. Almost. I left at 2 and came back at 6. It's just a case of murder motivated by jealousy and deception. I don't see why you need to dig so deep. Sandra handed him a thin folder. Here's something interesting. Melvin Carter showed up in Sand Springs exactly 12 years ago. There are no records of him before that. It's as if he came out of nowhere. Jim leafed through the documents. He changed his name after he moved. It makes sense that the old records are under a different name. Exactly. Melanie Robinson, that's who he was before. Born in Dallas, graduated from high school with honors, enrolled at the University of Texas to study architecture. In his sophomore year, he took a leave of absence, and that's where the records end. The next mention is as Melvin Carter, 5 years later. And 5 years, Jim. Where does a man disappear for 5 years? What happened during that time? Jim frowned. Well, obviously, transition, surgery, hormone therapy, changing documents, all that takes time. Not 5 years, Sandra shook her head. And there's something else. Finances. Melvin started his business from scratch with no loans or investors. Where did he get the startup capital? Maybe family money? His parents died in a car accident when he was 19. The insurance was minimal. Jim put the folder aside. What are you getting at? Do you think he was involved in something illegal? Sandra shrugged. I just want to understand the whole picture, especially since we have a lead. Melvin's phone showed frequent calls to Alora Pierce. The last one was the day before the murder. A mistress? I doubt it. According to Melvin's colleagues, Laura is an old friend of his who owns the Aphrodite Beauty Salon on Main Street. I'm going to visit her today. Jim shook his head. I don't understand your obsession. The woman confessed to the murder. The motive is clear. Why complicate things? Sandra gathered her documents into her bag. Because it's my job, Jim, and because life is more complicated than it seems at first glance. She left the station, leaving her partner behind in a huff. Their disagreements were nothing new, but they had become more pronounced in this case. For Jim, it was black and white. Hilda had learned the shocking truth and, in a fit of rage, killed her husband. But Sandra felt that there was more to this simple version of events. The Aphrodite Salon was located in a small, renovated Victorian building. The soft pink facade, well-tended rose bushes at the entrance, and elegant sign created an atmosphere of sophistication. Inside, it smelled of lavender and expensive cosmetics, and jazz played softly. A young woman with an elaborate hairstyle sat behind the reception desk. Welcome to Aphrodite. How can I help you? Sandra showed her badge. "Detective Johnson, I need to talk to Laura Pierce." The girl visibly tensed. "Miss Pierce is with a client right now. Can I schedule you for another time?" "This is about the murder of Melvin Carter. I think she can see me right now." A few minutes later, a tall woman in her late 30s with flawless skin and short hair emerged from the back of the salon. Her movements were smooth and confident, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. "Detective, I'm Laura Pierce. Let's go to my office." The office was small but elegantly furnished, with a view of a quiet courtyard. Laura offered Sandra a chair and sat down opposite her. "You're here about Melvin, aren't you? I heard about what happened last night. I still can't believe it." Sandra studied the woman in front of her intently. "Were you close to Mr. Carter?" "We were friends for 20 years. We knew each other since school." Laura paused. "I knew Melvin before he became Melvin. Did you know about his past?" "Of course. I was there when he made the decision to transition. I supported him all these years." Sandra nodded. "Tell me about him. What kind of person was he?" Laura picked up a framed photograph from the table and handed it to the detective. The picture showed two teenagers, Laura and a girl who bore a striking resemblance to the future Melvin. Melanie was bright, intelligent, but very unhappy. Since childhood, she had felt uncomfortable in her own body. In high school, she tried to live up to expectations, dated boys, wore dresses, but it was like a costume she wore for others. When did the transition happen? Officially, 15 years ago, but it was a long journey. After her second year of college, Melanie couldn't take it anymore. She had a nervous breakdown. Her parents had already passed away by then, and she had no support except me. She dropped out of school and moved to Houston. What happened next? Laura sighed. A dark period. Melanie worked wherever she could, saved up for surgery, and started taking hormones. We kept in touch, but we rarely saw each other. Those were difficult years. A 5-year gap in her biography, Sandra said thoughtfully. Yes, about that long. Then, when the transition was complete, Melvin decided to start over. He moved here to Sand Springs and started a small construction company, which eventually grew into a successful business. Where did he get the money for the business? Laura hesitated. I'm not sure I should talk about that. Miss Pierce, your friend is dead. His wife is in custody. If you know anything, now is the time to share it. Laura was silent for a long time, then nodded. Melanie had a patron, a wealthy man who fell in love with her before she transitioned. He financed all her surgeries and then gave her money for the business. Name? Jeffrey Montgomery. He died of cancer 8 years ago. Sandra wrote down the information. Did Melvin keep in touch with him? No. After the transition, Melvin wanted to completely break with his past. He was grateful to Jeffrey, but they went their separate ways. What do you know about his relationship with Hilda? Laura smiled sadly. He loved her, truly. When they met, Melvin was beaming with happiness, but I saw the problem right away. What problem? Hilda is very conservative, religious. For her, family means a man, a woman, and children, nothing else. I warned Melvin that she might not accept the truth. Was he planning to tell her? Yes, after the wedding. We talked about it a lot. He believed that their love was stronger than prejudice, that Hilda would accept him for who he was. Did he talk to you before he died? Laura nodded, holding back tears. He called the day before. He said he was going to tell Hilda everything. He was nervous but determined. He said, "It's time to stop living a lie. I want her to love the real me, not some made-up image." Sandra paused, giving the woman time to collect her thoughts. Do you think Hilda knew the truth before that day? No way. Melvin was very careful. He destroyed almost all traces of his past. I don't know why he kept the photos Hilda found. Maybe as a reminder of how far he'd come, Sandra suggested. One more question. Who else knew about Melvin's past? Almost no one. In Sand Springs, only me. Melvin built a new life for himself, became a respected businessman and philanthropist. He was afraid that the truth would destroy everything he had achieved. As she left the salon, Sandra felt she was beginning to understand Melvin Carter better. A man who had fought all his life for the right to be himself, but who had lived in constant fear that the truth would come out. The tragic irony was that it was his decision to open up that cost him his life. Returning to the station, Sandra found Jim poring over the case files with unusual intensity. "Found anything interesting?" she asked, sitting down next to him. "Maybe," Jim said, pointing to the ballistics report. 3 shots, all to the chest, from a distance of about 2 meters. A professional hitman would be proud of this work. "What are you getting at?" Hilda claims she was in a state of emotional distress and acted impulsively. But look at the nature of the wounds. This isn't the random shooting of someone in hysterics. This is a methodical murder. Sandra frowned. "Hilda's a nurse. She knows anatomy." "Exactly. And I checked her background. 5 years ago, she took a self-defense course that included shooting. The instructor described her as extremely focused and accurate." "Are you changing your opinion about the case?" Jim shrugged. "Just stating the facts. If a woman finds out her husband used to be a woman and shoots him in shock, I'd expect to see random shots, maybe misses. But this is too precise." Sandra thought about it. Jim raised an important question. Was the murder a spontaneous act, or was Hilda more calculating than she wanted to appear? "We need to find out more about Hilda," Sandra decided. "I'll get her personal file from the hospital. I'll talk to her colleagues and neighbors. You check her finances and phone calls for the last month." "Do you think she could have known the truth beforehand?" "I don't know yet, but something in her story doesn't add up." After lunch, Sandra went to the city hospital where Hilda had worked for the last 7 years in the cardiology department. The head of the department, Dr. Clark, welcomed the detective into her office. "Hilda was an excellent nurse," said Dr. Clark, looking through her file. "Punctual, responsible, attentive to patients. What was she like as a person?" "Reserved, professional. She didn't participate in office gossip and rarely went to company parties, but her colleagues respected her." "Did she have any close friends at work?" Dr. Clark thought for a moment. "I wouldn't say so. She kept to herself, although she sometimes had lunch with Paula from the reception desk." The conversation with Paula gave Sandra new information. Hilda came from a strictly religious family where traditional values were the law. Her father was a deacon at the local Baptist church, and her mother led a Bible study group for women. "Hilda often talked about sin and redemption," Paula said. "Once, Nurse Jason joked about the gay pride parade, and Hilda reacted so strongly that everyone was shocked. She said that some things are unnatural and against God." "How did she feel about transgender people?" "I don't remember her saying anything specific about that. But given her attitude toward same-sex marriage, I would guess that she was extremely negative." By evening, Sandra returned to the station with a new understanding of Hilda Carter, a strict upbringing, unshakable faith, and a clear division between right and wrong had shaped a woman for whom the truth about her husband was not just a shock, but a complete collapse of her worldview. Jim was waiting for her with the results of his search. "I found something interesting in the phone records. A week before the murder, Hilda called a fertility clinic, and the day before the incident, she withdrew a large sum of cash from the bank." "Why?" "I don't know yet, but it looks suspicious." Sandra decided to visit Hilda in the detention center. After the standard procedures, she was taken to the interrogation room where the suspect was waiting. After a day in custody, Hilda looked noticeably haggard, but she maintained the same detached calm. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Carter?" Sandra began. "Like a person who has lost everything," Hilda replied in an even voice. "I'd like to ask you a few more questions. Have you spoken to a lawyer?" "Yes. He advised me to remain silent, but I don't see the point. I did what I did." Sandra opened her notebook. "You visited a fertility clinic last week. Why?" Hilda tensed slightly. "Melvin and I were planning to have children. After we got married, we decided not to wait, considering my age. I made an appointment for a consultation." "Did Melvin know about this?" "Of course. It was our mutual decision." "And he agreed to be examined at the clinic?" Hilda hesitated. "He said he had a busy schedule, but he'd find time soon." "He was stalling," Sandra said gently. "Because he knew he couldn't have children." Hilda's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, another lie, another betrayal." "You withdrew a large sum of money from your account the day before the murder. Why? Does it matter?" "Perhaps." Hilda sighed. I was planning to surprise Melvin, book a trip for the anniversary of our first date. I wanted to pay in cash so he wouldn't see the charge on his card. Sandra nodded, making a note. How did you find out about his box of documents? I already told you. I found it by accident while sorting through his things. It's strange that Melvin kept such important documents in an accessible place, considering how carefully he hid his past. Hilda remained silent. Mrs. Carter, you're a religious person. How does your faith relate to murder? Don't you dare judge me! Hilda showed emotion for the first time. You don't understand what I've been through. I believed I had married a man, a real man, and it turned out that my whole life was a mockery, a sin, a perversion. Did you really love him? Hilda covered her face with her hands. Yes, God help me. I loved him. I thought I had found the perfect man. Strong, caring, successful. He was everything I ever wanted. And when did you find out the truth? It was like the world collapsed, like someone told me that I had been living in a dream all these years and that reality was completely different. I couldn't accept it. Sandra watched the woman closely. Did you shoot him in the heat of the moment, or was it a conscious decision? Hilda looked up. What does it matter? He's dead. I killed him. It matters to the court. Manslaughter and murder are different crimes. I don't remember, Hilda said quietly. All I remember is his words. I'm still the same man you fell in love with. And I screamed that he was never that man, that it was all a lie. Leaving the holding cell, Sandra ran into Jim, who was waiting for her in the hallway. So, are you convinced it was a crime of passion? He asked. I'm convinced that Hilda Carter is a complex person with strong moral principles whose world was destroyed in an instant, Sandra replied. But I'm still not sure I have the whole picture. Don't you think you're being too sympathetic? Jim frowned. She killed a man for who he was. I'm not being sympathetic, I'm trying to understand. There's a difference. It's simple, Sandra. A woman with conservative views found out that her husband used to be a woman. She couldn't accept it and killed him. Tragic, but banal. Sandra shook her head. Nothing is banal when it comes to human lives, Jim, and I feel like we're missing something important. Like what? For example, why did Melvin keep those documents at home? Why did he decide to tell the truth now? And most importantly, did Hilda have any other reasons to want her husband dead besides the shock of discovering the truth? Jim sighed. You're digging too deep. Sometimes cigarette smoke just means a fire, not a secret signal. Maybe, but I'm going to keep digging. Sandra headed for the door. Tomorrow, I want to talk to Hilda's parents and check Melvin's financial records for the last 5 years. Why? Because murder is always a story, and I want to make sure we're reading it right. The Sand Springs District Attorney's office was located in a stately red brick building. Sandra Johnson climbed the wide steps, feeling the weight of the folder containing the Hilda Carter case files. 3 weeks of investigation were coming to an end, and today she was due to present her final report. District Attorney Marcus Green, psychiatrist Dr. Eleanor White, and of course Jim Harris, who despite their differences remained a reliable partner, had already gathered in the conference room. Detective Johnson, we've been waiting for you, Marcus Green said, pointing to an empty seat at the table. I hope you brought all the materials I requested. Sandra nodded and opened the folder. The complete investigation report, including ballistics results, witness statements, and Melvin Carter's financial records for the past 5 years. Excellent, Green took the documents. Before we move on to discussing legal strategy, I'd like to hear the conclusions of the psychological evaluation. Dr. White? Eleanor White, an elegant woman in her 50s, adjusted her glasses. I conducted 4 sessions with Mrs. Carter. My conclusion is that the suspect does not suffer from any mental disorders that could significantly affect her sanity or ability to be held responsible for her actions. So she was fully aware of what she was doing when she shot her husband? The prosecutor clarified. Not exactly. Dr. White opened her notes. Mrs. Carter experienced severe psychological shock upon learning about her husband's past. Given her strict religious upbringing and conservative views, this discovery completely shattered her worldview. At the time of the murder, she was in a state of emotional distress, but she retained a basic understanding of her actions. And your conclusion? From a psychiatric point of view, this is a case of temporary insanity caused by severe emotional distress. However, I cannot say that Mrs. Carter completely lost control of her actions. The prosecutor nodded and turned to Sandra. Detective, what is your position on this case? Sandra straightened up. She had been thinking about this moment for days, weighing all the facts and her personal feelings. I believe that Hilda Carter committed manslaughter in the heat of the moment. All the evidence indicates that she did not plan the murder in advance. It was an impulsive act by someone whose world had fallen apart in an instant. Jim flinched slightly but said nothing. A few days ago, he and Sandra had argued heatedly about the case, and she knew his opinion differed from hers. Interesting. Prosecutor Green tapped his pen on the table. What about the nature of the wounds? 3 shots, all to vital organs. That doesn't sound like the chaotic actions of someone in a state of emotional distress. Hilda Carter is a nurse with 7 years of experience. She knows anatomy like the back of her hand. Even under extreme stress, her subconscious could have guided her actions. And yet the fact remains, she killed a man for who he was. Green slammed the folder shut. In this day and age, that qualifies as a hate crime, which is an aggravating circumstance. With all due respect, sir, I disagree with that interpretation. Sandra leaned forward. Hilda didn't kill Melvin because he was transgender, but because he hid that fact from her. This is a crime of deception and betrayal, not hatred toward a particular group of people. An interesting point of view, the prosecutor pondered. Jim, what do you think? Jim Harris cleared his throat. I think Detective Johnson did an excellent job gathering evidence, but I'm inclined to classify this as second-degree murder. Hilda Carter had enough time to think about what she was doing, but instead she picked up a gun and deliberately took a man's life. Sandra struggled to contain her irritation. After weeks of working together, Jim still couldn't or wouldn't see the complexity of the situation. I suggest we charge second-degree murder, but be open to a plea bargain for manslaughter if the defense offers a compelling argument, Prosecutor Green concluded. Now, Detective Johnson, do you have anything else that might influence our decision? Sandra took a deep breath. There's one more witness I'd like to talk to before making a final decision. Laura Pierce, a close friend of Melvin's. In our previous conversations, she mentioned that Melvin was planning to tell Hilda the truth after the wedding. I want to clarify the details. You have 24 hours, Green said. I'll expect your final report tomorrow at this time. As she left the prosecutor's office, Sandra felt Jim's gaze on her. He caught up with her at her car. Do you really think this was manslaughter? He asked bluntly. Yes, Jim. I've studied all the evidence, talked to Hilda, talked to people who knew them both. This is a tragedy, not a cold-blooded murder. I think you're too emotionally involved in this case. Sandra spun around. I think you're oversimplifying a very complex human situation. Yes, I see Hilda not only as a murderer, but also as a victim of circumstances. That doesn't make me any less professional. I didn't say that. Jim raised his hands conciliatorily. I just want you to be sure of your decision. I am sure, Sandra softened. Listen, I'm going to see Laura Pierce. Want to come with me? Jim shook his head. I have reports to finish on other cases, but keep me posted. Laura Pierce met Sandra in the same office of her salon. Over the past few weeks, she had visibly aged, and the first strands of silver had appeared in her dark hair. Detective Johnson, how can I help you? I thought the investigation was over. Almost, Sandra said, sitting down in the chair offered to her. I need to clarify a few details before the case goes to court. You said Melvin was planning to tell Hilda the truth after the wedding. Why then? Laura sighed and looked away. Melvin was afraid. He knew how Hilda felt about unconventional relationships. He was afraid of losing her if he told her the truth before the wedding. But he understood that it was only postponing the inevitable? Yes, he hoped that marriage would strengthen their bond. That love would prove stronger than prejudice. That was naive, Sandra remarked. Maybe. But Melvin was an idealist, despite all the difficulties he had been through. He believed in people, believed that love could overcome any obstacle. When was the last time you spoke to him? The day before he died. He called me. He was upset. He said that Hilda had found some of his old documents and he decided it was time to come clean. Wasn't he afraid of her reaction? Laura smiled sadly. Of course he was. But he said he was tired of living a lie, that he wanted a real, honest relationship, even if it meant starting over. And why do you think he kept those documents at home, where Hilda could find them? Laura was silent for a long time, then said quietly, I think part of him wanted the truth to come out, so he wouldn't have to have that conversation himself. Sandra nodded. That version sounded plausible. Sometimes people unconsciously create situations that force them to do what they can't bring themselves to do. One more question, Laura. Did you ever discuss with Melvin what he would do if Hilda didn't accept the truth? Yes, Laura swallowed. He said he would give her time, that he would be prepared for her to ask for a divorce, but he also said he wasn't going to give up without a fight, that he'll prove to her that he's still the same man she fell in love with. Thank you, Laura. Sandra stood up. You've been very helpful. Detective, Laura called after her at the door. What will happen to Hilda? The court will decide, but I'll recommend mitigating circumstances. You know, I can't hate her, Laura admitted. As much as I love Melvin, I understand that Hilda is also a victim of our society, which teaches us to fear and condemn those who are different from us. Sandra nodded. Tragedy is rarely black and white. Most often it consists of shades of gray. Sandra spent the entire evening finishing her report for the prosecutor. In fact, the investigation was complete. All the evidence had been gathered. All the witnesses had been interviewed. But for some reason, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. Around midnight, the phone rang. Sandra was surprised to see Jim's name on the screen. Are you still up? He asked without preamble. Finishing up my report. What's going on? I checked Melvin's financial records again, and I found something. A week before the murder, he changed his will. Sandra sat up straight. And? He left everything to his wife, except for 20% of the company shares, which were supposed to go to Laura Pierce. That's unexpected. Yes, and here's something else interesting. I spoke to the Carters' neighbor, Mrs. Johnson. She saw Laura come to their house on the day of the murder, about an hour before Melvin returned from work. Sandra felt a chill run down her spine. Laura didn't mention that to me. I thought so, Jim said, a hint of triumph in his voice. Maybe your theory about accidental murder is wrong. What if Laura knew about the will? What if she got Hilda to kill her husband so she could get her share of the company? Sandra shook her head, though Jim couldn't see it. It doesn't add up. If Hilda had planned the murder in advance, she would have come up with a more plausible alibi than I found his papers and shot him in a fit of rage. Maybe that's exactly what they were counting on, a crazy wife who discovered the shocking truth, a convenient explanation. But why would Laura frame Hilda? She would have gotten her share anyway. I don't know, but I think we need to dig deeper. Sandra thought for a moment. Okay, tomorrow morning I'll talk to Laura again, and I'll check her finances too. The morning brought an unexpected turn of events. Laura Pierce came to the police station herself before Sandra had a chance to go to her. I need to tell you something, she said, nervously fiddling with the strap of her purse. I haven't been completely honest with you. Sandra led her into the interrogation room, where Jim was already waiting. We're listening. I did go to Hilda's house on the day of the murder, Laura began. Melvin asked me to. He had decided to tell her the truth that evening and wanted me there for moral support. Why did you hide that? Because I left before Melvin came back. Hilda was furious when I hinted that Melvin was going to tell her something important. She screamed that she wouldn't tolerate any secrets in her house. I got scared and left. If I had stayed, maybe Melvin would still be alive, Jim finished for her. Yes, Laura lowered her head. I live with that thought every day. What about the will? Sandra asked. Did you know Melvin left you a share in the company? Yes, he told me about it a few days before. It happened. He said that no matter how Hilda reacted to the truth, he wanted me to be protected. Protected? Jim frowned. From what? Laura took a deep breath. Melvin was afraid that if Hilda didn't accept the truth, she might try to take the company away from him in the divorce. He wanted part of his legacy to go to someone who knew him for who he really was and accepted him as he was. Sandra and Jim exchanged glances. Laura's story sounded plausible, but it didn't explain all the circumstances of the case. Miss Pierce, did you ever discuss with Hilda the possibility of a more radical solution to the problem? Jim asked cautiously. Laura's eyes widened. You think No, never. I loved Melvin. He was my best friend. But you benefited from his death, Jim pointed out. I would give all the shares in the world to bring him back. Laura jumped up, her eyes filling with tears. You don't understand. Melvin was the only person who was always there for me, who accepted me for who I am. Who are you? Sandra asked quietly, suddenly realizing what she might have been missing all this time. Laura froze, then slowly sat back down. I'm a transgender woman too. Melvin and I went through this together, just in different directions. I was born Lawrence. He helped me find myself, just like I helped him. Hilda Carter's trial began 2 months after the murder. The courtroom was packed. The high-profile case had attracted not only local residents, but also journalists from across the state. The story of a woman who killed her husband after learning about his transgender past sparked heated debate in the community. Sandra sat in the front row. Her investigation was complete. All the facts had been presented to the court. Now all that remained was to watch as the justice system decided Hilda Carter's fate. Prosecutor Green charged her with second-degree murder, arguing that Hilda had had enough time to think about her actions after discovering the truth. The defense, on the other hand, insisted on manslaughter committed in the heat of the moment. Hilda's lawyer emphasized the deep emotional turmoil his client had experienced and the lack of any evidence of premeditation. Laura Pierce's testimony was one of the key moments of the trial. She spoke about her friendship with Melvin, his struggle to be himself, his love for Hilda, and his fear of losing her because of the truth. Psychiatrist Dr. White gave an expert opinion on Hilda's mental state at the time of the murder, confirming that she had suffered severe emotional shock that could have significantly impaired her ability to think rationally. Hilda herself remained reserved and calm. She admitted her guilt in the murder, but insisted that she had not planned it in advance. I just couldn't accept that my whole life with Melvin was built on a lie, she said, looking straight at the jury. The jury deliberated for almost 2 days. When they returned with their verdict, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant not guilty, read the foreperson. On the charge of manslaughter, we find the defendant guilty. Hilda closed her eyes as she accepted the verdict. Her parents, sitting behind her, clasped their hands in prayer. The judge sentenced Hilda Carter to 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 4 years. In addition, he ordered mandatory psychological counseling and participation in programs on tolerance and acceptance of diversity. After the hearing, Sandra met Jim at the courthouse exit. Fair verdict? She asked. Jim shrugged. The jury decided. The system works. But do you agree with their decision? I don't know, Jim admitted honestly. Part of me thinks she deserves a harsher punishment. She took a human life because of her prejudices. But another part of me understands that she is also a victim of a society that teaches us to fear those who are different from us. Sandra nodded. I feel the same way. All this time I've been torn between my professional duty and my personal feelings about the situation. As a detective, I saw evidence pointing to murder, but as a human being, I saw the tragedy of 2 people who loved each other but couldn't overcome the barriers created by society. You know what's the saddest part? Jim looked at the courthouse. Melvin wanted to live honestly. He wanted to be accepted for who he was, but our society isn't ready for that kind of honesty yet. Maybe someday it will be. Sandra paused. Did you know that Laura Pierce started a foundation in Melvin Carter's name? It supports transgender people who face discrimination. No, I didn't know that. That's good. They walked down the street, each lost in their own thoughts. The story of Melvin and Hilda Carter was over, at least from a legal standpoint. But its echoes lived on in the hearts of everyone who had been connected to it. I think the main lesson of this story is that secrets come at a high price, Sandra said. Melvin paid for his secret with his life. Hilda will pay with years in prison. And all because our society makes differences between people something shameful that must be hidden. Do you think if he had told her the truth earlier, things might have turned out differently? Jim asked. I don't know. Maybe they just wouldn't have gotten married. Or maybe, Over time, she would have accepted him for who he was. We'll never know. They stopped at Sandra's car. The sun was setting, painting the Sand Springs sky in deep shades of red and gold. You know what I've realized during this investigation? Jim leaned against the hood. Prejudice is a prison. It limits not only those it's directed at, but also those who hold it. Sandra smiled. Philosopher Jim Harris. Who would have thought? Hey, I can be deep too, he said, playfully nudging her shoulder. I just usually prefer to leave the deep thoughts to you. They laughed, and for a moment, the weight of the past few months lifted a little. Life went on, even after tragedy, and maybe someone would learn a lesson from this story about the importance of acceptance and honesty, about the price of secrets and prejudice in modern society.